Good evening and welcome to the Carolina Weather Group. I'm James Brierton in Charlotte. We have a great panel for you tonight. We are going to be talking about the flood threat against your house, whether you live in a flood zone or not. We have some great material for you tonight that may have you rethink the next time you're looking at your policies. Joining us from Charlotte, Bill McGinty, consumer reporter at WCNC Charlotte, and in full disclosure, I work with him during the day, so I feel like I need to throw that out there as I will be interviewing him in a moment. From WPDE, we have Annette Montgomery, who's a reporter there, who's been doing some local reporting on this topic in their neck of the woods. And we're also joined by April O'Leary of Horry County Rising, and they are involved with this exact topic there along the South Carolina General Coast area. But we'll start more inland with Bill McGinty, who, Bill, just last week, you did a story that kind of tipped this whole thing off to us here at the Carolina Weather Group. So why don't I just have you, the reporter, tell us, in your words, a little bit about what you uncovered here in the Charlotte area.
Yeah. So one of my jobs here in Charlotte is the consumer investigative reporter. And so people email me. I run a franchise called Get McGinty. And, you know, if you have a problem, you email me. And so I got this email from this couple, and I actually got the email in the middle of the 4 o'clock news, and he said, we're being flooded. Every time it rains, we get flooded, and it never used to happen. We can't figure out why. The city was working on the storm drain system. We're wondering if that maybe had something to do with it or not. And so I replied back and I said, just send me a couple of photos if you wouldn't mind. I'd like to see what you're talking about. He sent me back some photos, and when I looked at the photo, I said, I'll be out there first thing tomorrow morning. He showed me, he's got a townhouse, a 3-story townhouse, and the bottom floor of his finished townhouse was completely underwater, up above the water, above the fireplace. And I said, this is from a rainstorm? I mean, this looks like a river came up. He said, it comes up and then it goes away. And as long as the rainstorm lasts. His point was that if we get 3 inches of rain over 3 days, not a problem. But if we get 3 inches of rain in an hour, huge problem. So it's basically a flash flooding issue. And so one of the things we were able to do was get a hold of the city of Charlotte, which told him they'd look into this sometime about 2021, before they actually would drill down on this and figure out what the exact problem was. And they gave him, I don't want to say the runaround, but for lack of a better word, the answer wasn't good enough for him, which is why he reached out to me. I reached out to the city. I sent them some of his home video that he took, you know, on his iPhone. I sent some of the pictures. And I said, this is unacceptable. He can't live like this. This is his home. And so within a week, they had some digging equipment out there. And what they found was a couple of blockages in those pipes. And so just before we came on, and I mean literally just before we came on, within the last half hour, I got a text from him. They got some rain here in Mecklenburg County tonight. And he said, so far so good, fingers crossed, we haven't flooded. So maybe the blockage was the issue, maybe not. It's going to take a couple of more rainfalls before we know for sure. So I'm crossing my fingers that maybe we have solved this issue. But the bigger issue is his homeowner's insurance isn't going to cover this because this was considered rising water. And I don't care whether you live next to a creek, you live near a drainage ditch, you live alongside a river. If you have water come up from anywhere and it comes into your home, that is considered a flood, and that is not covered by your typical homeowner's insurance policy. If in a hurricane, which I used to live in Florida, so if in a hurricane, the roof blows off the home and you get a ton of water in, okay, that's water damage, and that is not flood damage. Rising water is water that comes in through the doors, through the garage, things like that. And that is a federal policy that you have to have. That is a completely separate policy other than your homeowner's insurance policy. I don't think, a lot of people know that, and I don't think a lot of people understand the risk they have to their home through rising water. Most people say, I'm not in a floodplain, I don't have to worry about it. I've seen plenty of those people, and I've covered plenty of those stories where they stand there scratching their heads wondering, what am I going to do now? Because their homeowner's insurance says, sorry, this isn't covered.
Well, that's some good update, though. A little breaking news there, that at least today it didn't flood. And as we're recording this on Monday night, I'm looking over here at the Mecklenburg FIN system, the Flood Information and Notification System, and they had just shy of about an inch of rain there in Mecklenburg. Yeah.
So let me set it up, James, if you wouldn't mind. Let me, I talked about the rising water coming into his home, and you'll see it if we show some pictures and video here. But the bottom line is his townhome, if you can imagine this, runs this way, but the back of his town, the driveway runs down. And so you've got 4 townhomes, and the first one up at the street level is street level. But his is higher because the driveway slopes down in the back. And of course, because the driveway slopes down, you need a couple of grates down there that lead to rain runoff. And that's what was backing up. And it, of course, backs up to the lowest point, and the water came into his house. So I don't want to lead people to believe it came in from the street. It actually came in from the 2 grates that were in his driveway, but because he was down at the lowest point, water came up there.
And the grates are on private property, but are connected to city-owned drainage?
Yep. It's a stormwater drain. Think of what's out in your street. If you go out and you look at your street and you see those grates in the corners of the streets, that's a storm drain. And that's basically what he had, but flat in his driveway.
And people will probably know from looking at those, you'll sometimes see the little placard on them that says, do not drain liquid oil and such down into those, right, because they're connected to the streams and the creeks and the waterway.
100%.
Which in Mecklenburg County, as I think a lot of other places, but especially here in Mecklenburg County where we have the urban development, all of that infrastructure is needed for anyone who doesn't live here to drain off into our nearby creeks in order to keep that water flowing, ideally away from your house. Ideally. The gentleman you talked with, in terms of repayment, is the city offering anything in terms of mitigating this flood damage to his home?
Well, that's the next part of the story. Step number 1 was to get the flooding stopped and to get them out there and to dig into the ground and find out what was the problem. Was it a blockage? Was it pipes that were too big flowing into a pipe that was too small and it just couldn't handle it and backed it up? So step number 1 was getting the flooding stopped. But to answer your question, that's where the lawyers get involved, and that's where the city's legal department gets involved. And they're having conversations with him that right now I'm not privy to. But, in my experience, and I'm just cutting him out of it, but in my experience over 31 years, watching people wait for repayment from some kind of a government entity, I'd say it's about 50-50 as to whether you're made whole or not. Can the city be held liable for the first flood because they didn't know there was a blockage? Should they have known? It's what did you know and when did you know it? And so as soon as they were alerted to the fact that there was a problem, okay, now maybe they didn't act swift enough, and maybe there's a lawyer, his lawyer, that will make a compelling argument enough to say, hey, wait a minute, we alerted you that there's a problem. So that's where it gets sort of tricky, James, is that what are they really responsible for? The first flood or the following 7? And that's a good question. And, I'm looking forward to following it. I'm curious to see where it's going to go, but all of it could have been avoided in terms of waiting for the city to reimburse and whatnot if there'd been a flood policy.
It really struck me. When I first heard this story pitched, I thought, oh, he must live along a river or a creek or a stream, and he doesn't.
Nope.
Yeah.
Right in the middle of the city.
Bill, I want to come back to you in a few minutes because I know there's some more that you have to share, tips and tricks for folks wherever they live, things for them to consider on their homes. I want to bring in Scotty Powell, who's going to expand the scope and continue our conversation.
Yeah, thank you, James. Much like the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, another metropolitan area that's really growing a lot of urban development is the Horry County area, and that's Myrtle Beach, Conway, South Carolina. Tonight we have Annette Montgomery and April O'Leary with us. Annette, you cover this story a lot for WPDE. I came across some of your reports there. You guys see flooding maybe a little bit different than what Bill was talking about. Obviously, flash flooding, a big concern. But a big concern for you all in Horry County is when we see these heavy rain events occur. And this doesn't necessarily have to be tropical rains or tropical storm activity. This could just be heavy rain that's developed over North Carolina, anywhere between 3, 4, 5 inches of rain, and it kind of travels down the river system. Annette, you unfortunately have been covering these stories of folks who've been affected by also this water runoff and affecting many homes and many communities that are being flooded.
Yes, I actually know a lot of homeowners that are selling their homes just simply because of the flooding. I actually did a story last week with a woman who She moved into the house less than a year ago and wasn't told by the owners that it floods just from small rain events. And she said it's flooded so many times since she's been there that she wants to move closer to the beach, which is insane because where she lives is a lot further, but it seems like this community keeps seeing flood events. And the unfortunate thing, like Bill was saying, is that she doesn't have flood insurance and she bought this home with inheritance money. So she says she really feels like she's at her wit's end, and the county's telling her that, you know, to wait for this buyout program, but she knows she's not going to get 100% of the value of her home. So she says, you know, she feels like she's going to lose a lot of money, but she doesn't have another option at this point. And I've covered so many stories with similar families. Just another man, he's selling his home. But the concern that people have is when their homes flood, it's sewage water, it's things like that that's also in the water. So they're just very concerned for their overall health and their safety. So that's another huge portion that people might not realize, that these people are very concerned for their health as well.
And Annette, correct me if I'm wrong, but this isn't just one community. There's several communities throughout Horry County that's experiencing this. Seeing a lot of videos out of the Socastee area, places like that are really experiencing this. We just went through a primary. I know that was a big topic of discussion among the city council and county commissioners. What did they have to say about this as a lot of their constituents are facing this flooding threat, it seems, almost every month?
Yes, just last week I spoke with County Councilman Cam Crawford, and he tells me right now city leaders are looking into, and county leaders are looking into this relocation program, but they're waiting on money from HUD. So currently right now, it's a federal government concern that they're waiting on in terms of money to get to the county. But he said the only solution they're looking at right now is the relocation program, which buys out these homeowners. And a lot of them that I spoke with say that that's a huge concern for them because they don't want to be bought out, not at the market value of their homes. But that's the most immediate solution they're looking at right now.
I want to get to April in just a second, but as Bill was talking about, Charlotte, a big metropolitan area, a lot of construction, a lot of concrete, asphalt, things like that, not a lot of drainage. Horry County also experiencing kind of a big boom, a lot of folks, businesses, housing developments moving into that area. So does that play a factor into this flooding as well?
Definitely development, and I know April's probably going to speak to this too. But definitely a huge concern for a lot of the people living here is that a lot of these homes and developments are being built on wetlands. And a lot of these people that are moving from these other areas to Horry County, just like the woman I spoke with, I think she was from like New Jersey, they don't know about the flooding here and they don't know about the wetlands and how bad flooding happens just from rainfall. So a huge portion here and a huge thing that people focus on when they're speaking to these county councilmen is that, you know, development cannot happen on wetlands. And that's something that happens quite frequently. I know I probably talked about what April's going to speak about, but yeah, that's a huge concern, development.
Well, April, I want to bring you in. You run Horry County Rising, and this is a nonprofit group. You're out in the field. I've been following your Facebook page. Follow the pictures and the videos. You're actually out there with the folks who are being affected by this day in and day out with your rain boots on, high water, kayaking. I've seen a lot of things going on. Tell us about Horry County Rising and just kind of tell us some of the stories that you hear day to day.
Well, thank you so much. And thanks for not forgetting about families affected by flooding, especially to Bill helping to work with that family. That's a great model that I like to see in the media moving forward. But yeah, I flooded in Hurricane Florence, and prior to that was working in clean water protections. And I decided that I really thought that I could make a difference around flood mitigation and making sure our communities are more sustainable. Kind of seeing the trends and seeing the historical trends, both leading to loss of life, but also an increase in damages. And so I quit my position and created Horry County Rising. We are a social welfare organization trying to work with this vulnerable population around flood mitigation, but also trying to propel the government to have a plan. You know, we really believe that there's some good components of a good flood plan, And we're really frustrated and concerned at this point, given that this is such a significant hazard mitigation issue, but also a public health concern, that we really need to have a plan that kind of defines what our priority projects are, you know, a timeline for how to fulfill those, a funding source, a responsible entity, and really trying to explore all of the options that we have available to help reduce that exposure and reduce the catastrophic damages caused by flooding. And so, yes, we actually flooded twice this year. We flooded in February, and we also flooded in the first week of June. The last flood event is a community that actually was just built within the last 15 years. So, you know, we're essentially very concerned about future land use because we're seeing more and more homes flood. And we were really hoping that we purchase a product that can sustain a 30-year mortgage, and maybe even possibly sustain families and generations of families. And what we're seeing is we're not even getting halfway there to that 30-year mortgage, that these homes that were just constructed 15 years ago on the ICW continue to flood, continue to be rebuilt, resold to another unsuspecting homeowner. So we see these homeowners, particularly around the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway, repeatedly flood in the 4 or 5 times in the last 5 years. But we also are impacted by these significant riverine floods as well. So that's, you know, events like Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Florence, where we saw historical river crests. Hurricane Matthew broke Hurricane Florence's record level by 3.21 feet. It was the largest, most historical flooding event to hit this area. We've been fortunate. We haven't had too many storm surge impacts as of late, but we certainly do see concerns with flash flooding, much like you talked about earlier, Bill, where you know, our infrastructure is aging. It was based on this assumption that we would have consistent historical rainfall trends, and naturally these really significant events, these high peak rainfall events, contribute to those flash flooding impacts, and we see damages as a result of that as well.
April, obviously not mention any of the families that you work with, but just some of their stories. Can you tell us a few of those? I mean, I don't live near the coast, and I know coastal areas always hurricane threats there. We experience flooding up here in Western North Carolina, but we don't experience it like you guys do. I mean, it's just a constant, like you said, already 2 times this year, not counting all the previous years. What's their stories like? What are they telling you? I mean, I know you're the advocate for them, that you're going out and trying to spread the word. So what do you hear from these families?
The first initial response, I think, to any kind of catastrophic flood event is, you know, how do I control this water? But, you know, we're really trying to focus and shift that perspective and really kind of explain that this isn't a water issue, so to speak. Yes, we're seeing high peak rainfall events, more flooding, obviously as a result of rainfall events being more frequent and more intense. But, you know, this is a people problem. You know, it's just a flood if there's no capital investment in that area. You know, we won't see catastrophic damages. So it's really about understanding what your exposure is and understanding what your risk is, and doing all you can to mitigate that risk and reduce that risk. Annette touched on it. A lot of families, we have about 80 families that are interested in that flood mitigation buyout project that should be available, but we're competing with 10 other counties, and there's only 35 million. So we're going to have a serious unmet housing crisis in the middle of a huge growth and population boom. So a lot of this is just really smart future land use. I also think we're a particularly vulnerable county, so we're among the top 5 hazardous counties. We should probably exceed those federal standards and those regulations, given that we're particularly vulnerable to flooding. We have a 100% probability of flooding if we get a hurricane, as indicated just with a tropical storm that we recently had. So, you know, these families are particularly very vulnerable. We see a lot of financial stress. They lose their financial viability. So families that are typically getting ready to retire, or maybe just bought their last forever home and in retirement, that are on fixed incomes or flooding. They just bought their homes again, within 15 years, and, they're being impacted every year at this point. So there's a lot of real concern about that vulnerability and, how that really decreases a family's financial viability. And there's very few options. Obviously, protecting yourself and buying flood insurance is critical. You can flood from a tree or a beaver or a stormwater issue, or, Eastern Carolina getting 8 inches of rain. So, at this point, it's really crucial that we do all we can to educate the community about these issues, but also work with our elected leaders and our government to really take this very seriously and, do real common sense approach, like have a plan.
Annette, one more question for you. You had an article or a news story out last week, June the 15th. Some flooded homeowners in the Socastee area actually planned a protest to make their voices being heard to officials. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I spoke with one of the women who helped organize the protest, and what she basically told me is these homeowners, like April knows, they're just tired of flooding and tired of elected officials telling them that they're doing studies, and nothing is being done. So they said, they're doing this to make their voices heard. And I know April could probably speak to that as well. A lot of them they just said this is their last resort. They feel like they've spoken to county council members, they've spoken to elected officials, and they just feel like enough is enough. So they said they're gonna bring out some of their flooded items and have them laid out for people to see. And this is just to have officials really see how these people are being affected and what it's doing to them emotionally and physically, their stuff. So it's July 6th at 8 a.m. in front of the Horry County Courthouse, in case anyone wants to go. But yeah, I'm glad that, they're doing this. I think it's important.
Well, Scotty, I think that we would be remiss if Jared and I didn't also hop into this conversation and talk about Charleston. I can see it. I can see Jared cracking a smile every time you guys mention street flooding, because living in downtown Charleston, this is also an issue that we face regularly, at least once every couple of months. And it just like I said, it's a combination of water table issues, salt water getting into the pipes, as well as just freshwater flooding. So it's kind of a combination of everything, and blockages and sewers, and just it's a mess. But there's a real social problem where if you drive around downtown, you'll notice a distinct difference between higher and lower income portions of the area. A lot of the higher income areas in these homes, they're well off the ground. They're at least 5 feet above street level. Versus if you go to the lower income areas, a lot of these homes are literally sitting at street level. And both areas typically flood in heavy rain events. But unfortunately, one area sees significantly more damage than the other, just because of the way that the infrastructure is in that portion of downtown. So everyone has a plan. When the heavy rain starts, people start coming out and laying out sandbags. And that shouldn't have to be where we go to every time we have a thunderstorm, but unfortunately it is. It's a very serious problem. And Jared, you've had a little bit more experience in Charleston, and you certainly run the weather page that deals with all of the reports. So I'll let you jump in here as well.
Yeah, I mean, for historical reference, I used to live on Evans Street a lifetime ago, and I know that sewage water well. I know wading through that, I know losing a car to it almost. And so, there's real property damage that happens. And much as what you all are seeing in Horry County, we're seeing the same thing in Charleston. We have people building on wetlands. We have people, building in places where they shouldn't be. And now we have new flood hotspots coming up. Meeting in Hugie Street used to never flood. Used to be that was a clean getaway. That was an escape route from downtown when many other arteries were closed. And now it's got the same problems. You're building right at the base of the Ravenel Bridge there, and now it floods. And that's just within the last year kind of thing. And then it gets up 6.7, 6.8 feet, and it floods all around the low income housing right around the Citadel. And it's just like, and this happens. There's no advisories, nothing like that, and you'll get a coastal flood statement at 6.8 feet because it doesn't affect a large enough area, but it affects those people. And so, we've got, Evan is dead on when he said we have an inequality issue when it comes to this. And suffice to say, these problems that you're seeing there are endemic up and down the coast. You have, you can't help but wonder, there's been scuttlebutt in Charleston about them just not insuring these places anymore. Mm-hmm. and that is when you're going to finally start to see some change, because when they won't insure them anymore, then you'll start, then people will be rethinking their views. But yeah, no, I mean, we've got, we've got a major issue. It's just a tide, just a thunderstorm. We had a thunderstorm about a month or so ago. We had a thunderstorm set up just off the coast. Stalled out a little bit, had a water spout with it. But the problem is, on the north side of that storm, the rainfall rates have become so enhanced. It rained 5 inches in an hour. Wow. We're seeing more and more of those kinds of events. The Army Corps of Engineers is studying a seawall. They're gonna build a wall in the battery, make the floodwaters pay for it, I guess. I don't know. But, and it's like, okay, well, that's all well and good, but that's not going to solve the problem, as Evan said, of the water coming up through the drains. And then you have the water coming up through the drains, so we have these things called check valves. And when the tide hits a certain height, check valve kind of clutches and fills the drain, and then no water comes in. But what if it rains on top of it? Then that has nowhere to go. So when you're trying to fight the laws of physics, generally speaking, it's not going to go well for you. And we're learning some very expensive lessons in Charleston right now. I mean, they're pumping millions and millions and millions of dollars into this, but sea level keeps going up. We keep getting these heavy rain events. I mean, Charleston, Beaufort, those areas, Horry County, Myrtle Beach area, all the way up, Wilmington, we've got problems. I mean, we've got big, big problems.
I don't know if people who listen to this show on a regular basis are thinking, I haven't heard Jared that much in like a year. Jared is really passionate about this, and some great points there, Jared. And that's what I was. I don't know, Jared, if in the years we've been doing this show, I've ever seen you that fired up.
I love it.
It's a big problem. And it's a big problem. It's just one of those things. It's just so self-inflicted, and it just keeps happening. It's like, that's not cool, man. That's not cool. I'll shut up now.
April, in this cycle of proposing, planning, and building, and we loop around again, in your experience, where do we start the problem solving? At what point in this cyclical wheel?
Your backyard, right? So you want to have a backyard perspective. You want to pay attention to your county planning commission. You want to review future land use projects. You want to educate yourself about the special flood hazard areas. You want to make sure you speak up, whatever district you live in, and work with your elected official and let them know your concerns about whether that project will increase flood risk or exposure. And I think, making sure you take advantage of public input opportunities at a council level. And then I also think, there's so much value in coming together. Like Horry County Rising really takes care of our own. And we provide a forum, but also a support network. So we're all learning from each other. And I think there's just something so powerful about that, because, every day we're growing and growing, and we're learning more and more. And, we took it from, just 80 people to 25,000 in 1 year. So I'm really optimistic. I have a lot of hope. And I think it's really important that when you're in this line of work, that you can remain hopeful and be optimistic. But I think it's really important to look at this from a vulnerability perspective, and really make sure that we critically look at some of those socioeconomic vulnerabilities, and make sure that whatever decisions that we make, that they are benefiting our socioeconomic factors and communities. So, that piece is really crucial. And obviously trying to overcome those deficits. There's not enough money. We're always going to have more need than we do funding and resources. So partnerships and engaging with other stakeholders like all of you is really critical, and being engaged is critical.
Bill, I want to bring you back into the conversation because at the start of our program tonight, you were telling us about a gentleman here in Mecklenburg County who fell victim to urban flash flooding. You know that I recently bought a house. And when we bought our house, I looked at it's atop a hill, and water should flow away. But tell me, Bill, what other things as a homeowner do I and all of the other homeowners out there need to be considering to put ourselves in the best position we possibly can?
All right. First of all, let me apologize for my lighting because it got dark on me. I'm outside.
I'm just glad you're enjoying the beautiful Carolina weather.
Yeah, I'm not telling those stories, although it may look like it. But okay, so I don't care where you are, you should entertain the idea of a flood policy. They are not that expensive. And I will tell you, it's the first thing people tend to cut out of their budget. Now, I'm going to circle back around to something I think what Scotty said before about, when are they just not going to insure? Well, you know what? People need mortgages to buy some of these places. And so if insurance won't insure it, then you can't buy it. And so I think he raised a very good point there, that when insurance gets tired of paying for these bailouts and gets tired of, we used to say the same thing. When are these people along the beach going to quit building homes along the beach? When we know this area gets hit by hurricanes all the time. Well, they're going to keep rebuilding as long as insurance pays for them to rebuild. And so it's sort of the same problem here. I lived in Tampa. I lived in flood zone 3. So I lived at the very top of Tampa Bay, literally the bay. And so I was in flood zone 3, which meant A, B, C, so C. I was not going to flood. It had to get like 2 miles inland. But a Category 4 hurricane would push that water inland, no problem. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to be proactive. I was young. I had flood insurance. But as soon as our firstborn came along, I thought, all right, I got to slash the budget. What's going to go? And it was my $200 a year flood policy that went. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to need it. And as it turns out, I didn't need it, but I rolled the dice. And now that I'm older and wiser, I would tell people that even if your real estate agent who's trying to sell you something, or the buyer who is trying to sell you something tells you you don't need a flood policy, don't listen to them. You make that decision as to whether or not you need a flood policy. I've got a creek nearby here where I just bought this house a few months ago. I don't think it's anywhere near anything I need to worry about, but I'm going to get a flood policy. It's just good protection. I think as long as people want to live near the water, and Charleston is a beautiful area, you know what? People are going to continue to build near the water because it's tax revenue. It's a lot of money for the county and for the city. And so to put up those opulent properties and then sell them for mega bucks, you bet. They're not going to be around when the floods come up, but they're going to have their hand out when they want the tax revenue. So I think as long as people are willing to buy those properties and live in those areas, even with the risk, they're going to continue to do it. It's not anything that's going to go away anytime soon. The only thing you can do to mitigate this for yourself is to buy a federal flood insurance policy, and it's under $200 a year. Now, if you live right on the coast, it might be more, but I'm talking for myself here in Mecklenburg County. It's somewhere between $100 and $200. The other thing that April and I think both of you mentioned is that these homeowners that are selling these properties to people, knowing that they flood, not disclosing that, I mean, that's a legal issue right there. Now, if your home's flooded, what am I going to do? Fix my house, or am I going to file a lawsuit against the former owner? It comes down to how much resources do you have? How much money do you have in the bank, and where do you want to put those resources? A lot of people would just choose to fix the home and then get out of it again. But, you just really can't rely on, you should be able to, the seller and the real estate agents involved, but you have to protect yourself. And the only way, again, going back to, is a flood insurance policy.
Are there different tiers or different versions of this flood insurance that different people should be considering?
Yeah, I'm not in the insurance business, so I won't pretend like I am. But having looked at a lot of insurance policies over the years, just through the eyes of a consumer reporter, yes, there are. If you live along the coast, you're going to pay a higher premium to live there, and a lot of people are willing to do that. But if you live inland, if you live just anywhere near a creek or a river, and I'm not saying so that you have riverfront property, but if you live anywhere near it, and I think it's reasonable to ask, what's the 500-year flood plan? Most people don't think, 500 years, that'll never happen. Well, look what's happened in the last few years.
Yeah. And I know here in Mecklenburg, and I can't speak for Horry County or any other municipality in the Carolinas because I think it varies. There are maps out there that hopefully you can get your hands on. You can here in Mecklenburg. You can go on to, I want to say county, could have been city.
Yeah, yep.
And
your
you
county
can see,
and city government. Yep. They'll make it all available to you, and you have to then take the ball and put it in your court and decide whether or not you want to spend a couple $100 a year for a flood policy. And it is worth it. It is worth it. And I'm going to be getting one here. We just moved in here a few months ago, and we're coming into the rainy season now. It is definitely something that is worthwhile.
I know when we bought our house, I looked at that map and we were clear of the 500-year flood plain for the nearby creek. But I think after tonight's conversation, I'm going to take another look at that because it's not out of the question. And, the thing that is striking to me that is timely to this conversation, just in the past few days during their regular coronavirus briefing, you had North Carolina state officials coming out and reminding folks that they can still sign up for hurricane relief programs. Hurricane Matthew, Hurricane Florence. These storms are over 2 years ago, and folks are still needing help to clean up. I don't have to tell you that if you're watching or listening to the show and you're in that position, but I will say it's easy for me here in Charlotte to forget that there are still communities trying to clean up from those storms, those floods more than 2 years ago.
Yeah, Jane, let me throw one more point and a lot of people think that, you know what, I'll just wait till I see a storm coming and then I'll get the policy. But a lot of these policies have exclusions, and sometimes they won't write 30 days before a storm. Now, nobody knows 30 days out when there's going to be a storm, but it isn't something that you should sit on your hands. If you're even thinking about it, you shouldn't wait, because a lot of insurance companies will not write policies the minute your area goes into a hurricane watch or a hurricane warning, or even a flood watch or a flood warning, or if rain's expected heavy and the meteorologist is saying, hey, I think there might, look for a flood watch. The insurance companies are going to use whatever they can to not pay you, down the road if they could. That's how they make money. That's their business model. They don't really want to pay out. And so you can't sit on your hands and wait for the radar to start spinning counterclockwise before you decide you want to do something. At that point, it's too late. You just got to hope for the best.
It reminds me of life insurance. We got life insurance after my son was born, and I think it had at least a 14-day, if not a 30-day kind of waiting period.
Yep.
I want to give each one of you a chance to tell us where we can find you or your organization on social so we can stay informed. But I also want to ask if there's anything else that maybe we forgot to ask or we didn't ask that you wanted to get out there. And I'll start with Bill on both of those points. Bill, how can we follow you on social and get updates on this and other stories like it?
The best way to follow me on social is I have a Facebook page that is station branded WCNC Bill McGinty. I put consumer stories on there and consumer advice from time to time. I'm not super active on social, but I should be. James, I see you grinning there.
Well, he will be. Don't worry.
Yeah, right. But you can also find, my consumer reports on WCNC.com. I just made up for it right there, James. WCNC.com and our WCNC Facebook page, they take a lot of the content as well. I just think that it's better to tell your friends and family members if they live anywhere near a body of water that they at least investigate a flood policy. You might be surprised how cheap it is, and it's one of those things. It's like life insurance. You don't. And I had a family member that needed the life insurance after signing up for it, and you know what? It made all the difference in the world in terms of childcare and things like that going forward. So I know we hate paying those premiums, but boy, I'll tell you, when you see rising water coming up, you're going to be darn glad you did.
And I think those are some good takeaways, Bill, because I hadn't thought about that waiting period for the flood insurance. And we are just into the start of hurricane season with 4 tropical cyclones thus far here in the Atlantic Basin. Annette, how can we follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter at Annette MTV and then Facebook at Annette Montgomery WPDE. And like Bill said, I'm going to brand my station, WPDE.com. You can find my stories there as well.
Right? Hey, you got to plug them, right? You got
making a lot of bosses happy.
That's right.
April?
We have a Facebook group called Horry County Rising. Our website is horrycountyrising.com. And the only thing I just wanted to add was I just wanted to thank you all for doing this today, because these families, your home is supposed to be your sanctuary and where you feel safe. And these families lose that after you flood. And so I think the more we can keep having this conversation, the better. So thank you so much.
And we appreciate you all and your time tonight and your expertise in joining us here on the Carolina Weather Group. And we'll remind folks at home that if you're dealing with an issue or have something on your mind that's weather related, you can always hit us up here at the Carolina Weather Group. Or if you're in any one of these areas and you need to get McGinty or Annette, we need to come up with, do you have a franchisee name yet? We need to come up with one. If you need to get Annette, you can do that as well too, to have them help you out in some of these situations. So on behalf of the Carolina Weather Group, with Jared in Charleston and Evan physically sitting in Asheville, but with Charleston in his heart, and Scotty Powell in the mountains, I'm James Brierton. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you back here next week for another edition of the Carolina Weather Group.